nations and the sacred land of all indigenous peoples. Present at this meeting are school board members, Superintendent Kent Pickell, a non-voting ex officio member, and Assistant School Board Clerk, Ms. Lori Sam. Ms. Sam, would you please call the roll?
Director Barlow.
Here.
Director Cook. Director Garcia.
Here.
Clerk McLaughlin.
Here.
Treasurer Martin.
Here.
Chair Nathan.
Here.
Vice Chair Workman.
Here. At this time, we offer the opportunity to say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item 2.1 is approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda?
Move approval. Second.
It has been moved and seconded to approve the agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The agenda has been approved. The agenda and documents for this meeting are available online at rochesterschools.org/assembly. Tonight's topic is the Comprehensive Achievement and Civic Readiness Report. The Minnesota Department of Education and Minnesota Legislature really renamed the world's best workforce to the Comprehensive Achievement and Civic Readiness Report. Superintendent Pickell.
Thank you, Chair Nathan and board members. This is a requirement for all school districts in Minnesota. It's candidly one I struggle with a bit insofar as I think it originates from the idea that school districts need to be forced to set goals and report on them. And to be blunt, folks at the Department of Education have told our staff that no one is going to look at this report at the Department of Education. I just want to make a personal statement that I think that's not how effective educational systems operate. But we're rule followers in Rochester Public Schools, and so we are pleased to have this hearing and provide this overview. I would love to work with the board's legislative committee beyond this session to encourage a much more thoughtful approach to state-level accountability and improvement, including changes in our testing system, but that is not our subject for tonight. And so I want to thank the team that is going to come up and give us an overview of the required indicators. We have Mona Perkins, our Chief Academic Officer, Peter Ruck, Director of Research and Improvement, Heather Willman, our Director of Academics at the secondary level, and Erica Schumacher, our Director of Early Learning. The outcomes that are listed in this report are ones that are very familiar to you as board members. You have already heard a lot about our MCA outcomes and our FastBridge outcomes. You're going to hear a bit more about that tonight. We have briefly touched on our ACT scores, so you'll hear a little bit about that, and you heard a lot last summer about our graduation rates. But we're required to put them all together in one place. I do want to have as a little tease, and I was actually just looking at prototypes of this today. In early 2025, we will have a new achievement dashboard that will debut on our website that will make these kinds of things available in a continuing, updated fashion. And so I'm looking for our homegrown version of this, and thank all of you for coming down. We, in particular because the board has had a chance in some cases to see these numbers, we also want to take advantage to briefly highlight some of what we're doing to improve our outcomes in these areas. And so we're meeting the requirement, which is time certain, needs to be done in the next couple of weeks, to send in this report and have an opportunity for people to comment on it. But if the board is interested, we can also have an opportunity for you to dialogue a bit with these key leaders about what we're doing to actually improve the outcomes in these various areas. So thank you. I'll stop talking and we'll jump in.
Thank you for having us. We have the slide deck. All right, you want to kick us off?
Sure. So, good evening. If I'm here, it must be data time. This is how I always introduce myself. It'll get old eventually. Tonight we are here for what was formerly known as the world's best workforce. It has changed yet again. You may remember a year ago I sat here and told you about changes to the reporting form and combining some things. That has again changed. So the reporting template is different and in a different system. Last year, the Achievement and Integration reports were combined with the World's Best Workforce report for the first time. The state has now separated them again, so they are now separate reports. Our comprehensive achievement and civic readiness report is due to the state on November 30th. It is true, on more than one webinar, we have been told explicitly by MDE staff that no one looks at these, and they are checking to see that we submitted it, and every other district submitted it. So that's our compliance check, and we will definitely do it. Tonight, we have our public information requirement, and that is what we are meeting by holding. So I will address our results at a glance, and then you'll hear from me again a little bit later on. I'll turn it over to my colleagues after this slide to address some of the ongoing initiatives that we have in each area. As you may recall from last year, the World's Best Workforce structure puts goals within 5 general buckets. The general buckets are listed on the slide on the far left. Within each bucket, we set goals, which is what appears in the middle, and the result of those goals is what appears on the left. So in looking at all students being ready for school, the district's goal was centered around early reading and early math, which is our K2 assessment platform K&1 assessment platform for Fastbridge. And as you can see, movement up a little bit in the reading domain and down slightly in math. Students achieving 3rd grade proficiency in reading. On the MCA reading, we had good results, up 3 points. But the growth proportions are still shaking out a little bit different when we're looking at students showing typical or aggressive growth over the course of the academic year. A close the achievement gaps goal, which is actually sort of something that makes my science brain explode, but that's a separate story. Our goal here is that students in all subgroups will score 2 points higher per year on the MCA. That would not actually result in convergence. The reading of all groups was flat or improved. We didn't have any group that saw a decrease, same thing with math. Students being career and college ready by graduation, measured in 2 ways with the career and readiness indexes on the ACT, as well as our goal around earning post-secondary credits prior to graduation. Both saw very encouraging trends over the last couple of years, and that continues. Our post-secondary earnings percentage has increased dramatically as well. That's almost to 50%. And finally, with all students graduating, the goal that the district had set was essentially a return to pre-pandemic graduation rates. I want everyone to take note that this is the class of 2023 that we are reporting on, not the students who graduated this past spring. So that is what you see with graduation rates. They have since continued to improve, as we've already covered in these meetings. And with that, I know that my colleagues can speak to those items under each bucket with initiatives.
So I'll cover the All Students Ready for School, which is largely focused on what are we doing around our early childhood key initiative this year, which is really looking at alignment between our early learning programming and what happens when students enter elementary school. So we'll be looking at assessment, curriculum, and instructional practices and how those align to make sure that we're speaking the same language. We're setting all students up that we serve in district, and how we can share that message out with community partners who also are looking to what we do in a really strong way. That way all students have a good foundation to start their school journey. And one example of this is through the READ Act, we were able to gain a grant to support all of our early childhood teachers getting trained in letters. So we're now speaking the same language around the science of reading as our elementary counterparts. And so we'll hopefully start to see additional growth in reading from the students that we serve.
And then all students in 3rd grade achieving grade level literacy. The 2 big things that we are doing this year is the adoption of Wit and Wisdom. And as you guys have been in buildings, you've gotten a chance to see the amazing implementation. We're getting a lot of really great feedback from teachers around how well the kids are doing. It is a lot of work for the teachers, so we're hearing that too, and it is true. It is a lot of planning, but the kids are really rising to the bar. Like the bar has been raised and the kids are meeting it, so that's fantastic. There was already a lot of groundwork laid the last year or 2 on MTSS, and this year was really getting in there and working with the buildings on the Tier 2 interventions and the core MTSS Wit and Wisdom hits the core instruction, which you want really solid core instruction. And then we're adding in the layers of the Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions. We've been going into buildings and working with them on how to analyze the data and how to match the data with really specific, like how to dig deep into the diagnostics of what kids actually need and how to align the reading instruction with the real specific skills so that we're maximizing our time with the kids. So those are the two big things that have consumed elementary and are well worth every minute. And then to close the achievement gaps between student groups, you'll see two of the same things again. So the adoption of Wit and Wisdom, and then also the MTSS reading interventions. But then at the secondary level, we're adding in the disciplinary literacy practices. We need to make sure that literacy is addressed in every single discipline, because reading is really, really important across the board. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yes.
That works.
We've seen a lot of work in the standards as well, because we see those practices being really important in the new social studies standards and the English language standards and the science standards. And sometimes it looks like argument or close reading of a primary source. But I think one of the things that's a little bit different with disciplinary literacy is that it's not trying to like shove reading into a content area just to say we're doing reading, but it's figuring out how do we get our students to really work with that discipline. So we've seen a lot of promise in those practices and in a better fit, just thinking about how it's situated within the discipline. I get to talk about the career and college ready by graduation. So as you saw, we see really strong increases in this area. So we're working on trying to increase the number of concurrent enrollment classes so that our students can earn college credit, but not necessarily have to go to RCTC to do that. We think that that's a good option for some students, but we want our students to be able to have those opportunities at the high schools. We'll talk a little bit about that when we do the course registration guide, because we're adding a new concurrent enrollment course. And then we've got the post-secondary readiness lessons, the Zello lessons. You've probably seen a lot of the information about those. And so those are being rolled out at elementary, middle, and high school. And so I was just in an advisory class at Dakota Middle School, actually, and kids were talking about looking at their own Dakota information and what kids were interested in, and then what their next steps might be when they think about registering. So I think we've typically waited too long to have those conversations with students, and so it's exciting to see that happening. And then we're really working hard on family engagement. We got a lot of feedback that our families don't really know everything that's in that 98-page course registration guide. And so actually we have an event next Thursday. We have 70 people RSVPing for our College Conversations event, where they're going to hear about all the ways that students can earn college credit. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but we're excited about just the engagement with our families and students. And I think because the conversations are happening earlier, we're seeing that engagement and interest. And then, again, just highlighting the disciplinary literacy work as part of the new standards. So we think that's all laying the foundation for this increase in this area.
So the All Students Graduate goal bucket, one of our initiatives that I've overseen in the last couple of months is some of our 9th grade analytic work. So there's an extensive body of research at this point that goes back a couple of decades at least that says that the transition into 9th grade is one of the most important predictors of whether or not a student will ultimately graduate from high school. So part of what we did was analyze a variety of different student and school characteristics. There are, I think, 18 of them, and put them into a statistics model called a binary logistic regression to see what the effect of each of those items would be on the odds of graduation. So that we can then try to figure out resources, or in the student trajectory, figure out how to break the trajectory from veering off course before it does. So that's sort of some of our initial work, and it feeds into the rest of the bullet points on the slide.
Yep, and we already touched on Zello and the post-secondary planning, like that is part of this.
And the registration redesign, we talked a bit about this, I think, with you last year, but we got a lot of feedback from families and students that our registration process doesn't work super well for all families, and that we could do a better job with preparing students to be ready to make selections on their courses. We could do more with like thinking about the pathway development and what might I have to take in 9th grade or 10th grade to be able to have this pathway. So we've taken that feedback, we analyzed it as a post-secondary readiness team, and then our counselors are actually making changes right now for this registration process. So kids will be registering in December. One example of something that came out of that is an elective fair. So kids can learn about the various electives, and we've got student leaders that are coming and talking about that. But just some good changes that we've been able to make to be a little bit more responsive to our families.
And then the last one is we have an initiative on reducing chronic absenteeism. I think you guys have talked about this before, that we received a grant from MDE. I mean, this is a nationwide concern, and so we're looking at ways to partnerships we can make, ways to streamline our own, to really address chronic absenteeism. You got to make sure your data is accurate first, and so like, how do we make sure that all of that is, how we take attendance is streamlined across the board, and then figuring out ways to minimize it, to figure out what's the root cause of why are kids missing, and then how can we provide the right supports? Because if they're not there, they're not going to graduate. We need them to be there.
So what comes next for us is submitting this report to MDE. Next in our work in RPS, we will be revisiting the grid of outcomes related to our strategic plan as we move forward with a revamped SCIP process in the next 3 years of strategic plan.
Well, board members will have a chance to discuss this later, so we'll move on to the public meeting feedback item 3.2. Districts and charter schools are required to hold an annual public stakeholder meeting on the progress made towards the comprehensive achievement and civic readiness goals. The meeting is designed to empower stakeholders to provide feedback on the data in the report. Members of the public who would like to provide feedback on the comprehensive achievement and civic readiness report you just heard will be asked to raise their hand to be recognized. When recognized, members of the public will be seated at the table at the front of the boardroom. And when providing feedback, members of the public are asked to first state their name and their connection to Rochester Public Schools. Feedback or questions should be directed to the board. Members of the public will have 3 minutes to speak per person, so as many people as possible can provide feedback. Would anyone like to provide feedback this evening? Second call, would anybody like to provide feedback this evening? And final call for feedback. Seeing no requests for comments, this special session is adjourned at 5:50 p.m. This regular meeting of the Independent School District 535 School Board is called to order at 5:51 p.m. on Tuesday, November 19th, 2024, in room 137 of the Edison building. The board acknowledges this site and all RPS sites are situated on the ancestral land of the Dakota people, and we honor the Dakota nations and the sacred land of all indigenous peoples. Present at this meeting are school board members, Superintendent Kent Packel, a non-voting ex officio member, and Assistant School Board Clerk, Ms. Lori Sam. Ms. Sam, would you please call the roll?
Director Barlow.
Here.
Director Cook.
Here.
Director Garcia.
Here.
Clerk McLaughlin.
Here.
Treasurer Martin.
Here.
Nathan.
Here.
Vice Chair.
Here.
At this time, we offer the opportunity to say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag Item 2.1 is approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda?
Move approval.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded to approve the agenda. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The agenda has been approved. The agenda and documents for this meeting are available online at rochesterschools.org/assembly. Item 3, comments to the board. There are no comments to the board this evening. Item 4, information and outreach. Item 1 is Rochester's referendum ranking. This is an information item. Superintendent Piquel.
Thank you, Chair Nathan. I want to invite our Chief Administrative Officer, John Carlson, to come up. One of the things that we talked about often during the referendum that recently concluded was where Rochester ranks compared to the other school districts in Minnesota that serve more than 10,000 students, and John has updated that ranking, and we thought we'd briefly share it with you and the community.
Great, thank you very much. Yes, I was telling the superintendent last week that I wanted to update this after the election because there were a couple questions on the ballot outside of Rochester, Minneapolis, and Lakeville. We're also running referendums. One passed, one did not, and I just kind of wanted to see where did we land compared to where we said. As the table shows, we did move up from the last place position. We were in 15th before the referendum, and now we are in 11th. We thought that we would jump to 10th, but once you applied the inflation factor, Lakeville did keep that 10th spot. So there was a little bit of movement at the top and then some movement at the bottom, and so it is nice to see that we are no longer at the bottom on this list. So the highlight, I guess, is we are now at 2,103 per pupil unit for local voter-approved support for our district. The average of this peer group is now bumped up to 2,315, which is South Washington County. They're right in that spot. And the median, or the exact midpoint right now, is held by Rosemount Apple Valley Egan School District at 2,228. I didn't put this in the table, but I did put in your background. There was questions about the property wealth of each school district. There were comments made that maybe these other districts that have higher amounts are actually wealthier districts, but the data actually showed that Rochester holds the 7th position as far as property wealth per pupil. So all other things equal, that can mean that it can feel like the tax is less impactful or less of a burden when you're higher up on that list. So, and that concludes my report.
Any questions, board members? Well, thanks for this information. It's a good follow-up.
We're number 11.
You're number 11. Doesn't look good on a t-shirt.
I'll take it.
Item 4.2, National Parent Involvement and Engagement Day and Substitute Educator Day. November 21st is National Parent Involvement and Engagement Day. For the past 30 years, this has been a day to raise awareness about the importance of family involvement and engagement in education and the positive impact it can have on student achievement. Throughout the years, we have all seen firsthand the difference that engaged and involved parents, grandparents, and caregivers can make in their child's education. Whether it is helping with homework, attending parent-teacher conferences, volunteering at school events, or advocating for student needs, every parent and caregiver has a unique and valuable role to play in their child's education. We also take this opportunity to recognize the work of our RPS staff in family engagement, especially our coordinator of family engagement and our school family engagement liaisons. We are grateful for the partnerships and shared commitment to student success that the district has with the parents and caregivers of our students, and look forward to providing continuing support of those partnerships through our CAPE, Caregiver and Parent Empowerment Program, and implementing the dual capacity building framework for family school partnerships across all our schools. The next recognition is Substitute Educator Day. November 15th was Substitute Educator Day. Substitute teachers are important educational bridges when regular classroom teachers are absent. RPS is fortunate to have so many highly qualified substitute teachers in our community. Our substitute teachers come from all backgrounds and aren't afraid to help out when they're needed. We thank them for their reliability and dedication to our students and staff, especially when we need them most. Our next agenda item is 4.3, Board Member Committee Updates. Does any board member have updates from their committees or any other information to share? Director Marvin.
Thank you. I would like to invite Danielle and Gabriel up here, please.
These are two students from Century High School. They also happen to be sisters, and they are two of the real movers and shakers on our student school board. They just this way. And if you'd sit at the table right here and sit in front of a microphone, and I am so proud of these two and the work that they are already doing, will continue to do, both on district issues and at their building on building issues. So could you introduce yourselves first, please?
Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Dogoiseke, and I'm a representative from the Centuries branch of Student School Board.
Hello, my name is Gabrielle Dogoiseke. I am a sophomore at Century High School, and I'm also a representative.
So before we get started, I would like to thank all of you who voted yes on the referendum. It was a very impactful bill, and it really helps our school system, so I want to thank all of you for that. So I will get started, and I'll be telling you all the updates on the student school board side of so far throughout the year. So high school students who are student school board representatives meet once a month in this boardroom as an advisory group to the superintendent and Rochester School Board. At our first meeting, the superintendent provided us with 17 important issues the district will be addressing this year. And they asked us to prioritize which ones would be the most important for students to have significant involvement in.
This morning, we focused on two critical topics that directly impact our schools: the current cell phone ban and improving attendance. We're starting by meeting with students at our schools to gather their thoughts on whether the cell phone policy is effective and what changes, if any, are needed. These insights will help us provide valuable feedback to the superintendent next month. In addition, we're hopefully to launch a summit at our schools to explore new ways to improve attendance and also issues that are vital for student success.
During this year, we'll also be learning about student leadership and how we can develop characteristics and strategies that are effective leaders for us to be effective leaders. It's a good opportunity to meet together with students from all over the different high schools, so we can play a role in making the school district an even better place to learn and grow. Thank you so much for having us and listening to us, and I hope you all have a good rest of your night.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Madam Chair, they had some honest feedback that I won't go into now, but they're not pulling any punches. They had good things to say.
Well, I'm really grateful for what Dr. Marvin and Mr. Ruffin does, along with Sarah Louise Henry, to empower the voices of our students. It's always a pleasure when they come and let us know, and we'll look forward to that feedback.
Well, and those students have power, so it's not tough to empower them.
And Madam Chair, if I may, I'd like to also acknowledge their dad, who has for a number of years been an advocate for education, and it's evident through his children. So thanks, Daniel.
Thank you. And, Director Workman.
Yes, Director McLaughlin and I had the opportunity to participate in the pre-delegate assembly meetings virtually this past week, in which we review all of the resolutions that have been submitted that the delegate assembly will consider on December 17th. So a couple of interesting things struck me. I won't go through all of them. There are quite a few, and we don't want to be sitting here for 3 hours. At least I don't. So one of the things that came up was that school board members and other city officials be allowed to participate remotely in a meeting. So right now, the way the law stands is you have to notify your location 3 days ahead of time. It has to be in a public place that's accessible by the public. You have to, provide the address as to where you are. So this has been very limiting for boards where a member is, sick, not sick enough to participate, but sick enough to not be at the meeting. In some school districts, this has caused a lot of issues with not even having a quorum so that the board can meet. So this will come up again in the legislative session. It was proposed last year, but was not included in the omnibus bill. Another thing, and this that was Resolution 22. Resolutions 26 and 7 address the mascots and the necessity for approval from all of the tribes in the state of Minnesota. And the proposal is that we would only have to have the neighboring tribe or the tribe that the land encompasses approve it. If there's more than one tribe, then it would be which tribe has the greater number of students, which would really impact a lot of school districts for that. We've had some issues with that with Dakota. There was one district, I thought this was interesting. They're a 6-member board, and right now they can vote, or the public can vote, to increase their numbers from 6 to 7. This particular district wanted to go the other way and go from 6 to 5 because they have trouble getting people to run for school board. And this would be easier. These are very, very small, small communities. And there was a pilot presented by, from the Virginia School Board to lengthen the school year to 200 days, and they want to be participating in a pilot program for that next school year or the following school year. They've already been working with their educators union on defining what the parameters are like and what that would look like. And then finally, there is a resolution submitted by MSB which is opposed to a statewide cell phone policy, which has been proposed by some districts. Once again, it's a question of local control. The local school board knows best what their community needs. And just as a matter of comparison, I was on an MSBA call this morning where there was a woman from a school district that has 312 students K through 12. So their needs are going to be very different from our district, which has considerably more students than that. So those are just a few of the highlights from this. The Delegate Assembly Guidebook is on the MSBA website, so feel free to peruse it. If you have any questions that you want to have Karen or me address, you can get those to us before December 7th.
Director Garcia.
Yes, I would like to offer in honor of the Century students being here. So I was able to go to the Century High School musical Sweeney Todd, which was excellent. And I think that it also, giving a nod to the parent and caregivers, it was clear that having boosters now for this very talented group of students has increased, I think, maybe some of the things like set design and construction and choreography and all of the other things that go along with a musical. And if you are interested, John Marshall also is putting on Mean Girls. They have performances on the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. So the performances on the 22nd and 23rd are at 7 p.m. and the November 24th date, that's a 2 p.m. show. And then Mayo High School is putting on Rent, and their performances are the 21st at 7, the 22nd at 7, the 23rd at 7, and then the 24th at 1:30 in the afternoon.
So I was able to go to 2 events last week. I joined the school at Hoover for their Ruby Bridges Walk to School Day. And it was sort of a culmination of a lot of work that they had done around some of their social emotional learning curriculum, focusing on bullying and empathy and putting yourself in someone else's shoes. They hosted Mitch Stevenson and a brass quintet who played some Dixieland and New Orleans music in honor of where Ruby Bridges is from, and also some other clapping along that happened in that gym that was great. One of the participants was a former band director in the district, and it was a really great event. They did a walk around the school, and then they also created an art gallery in their school with drawings and posters, poems, or piece of art that promotes positive change, anti-bullying, or the bravery and courage that Ruby Bridges showed. So it was just really a great all-school event. I also attended, speaking of family engagement, the Riverside Family Engagement Night, where they had community partners there, like the Rochester Public Library, giving out free books, and they had a gym full of STEM activities that were sponsored by the Rochester Area Council PTSA. And there were students from UMR and Winona State who came and volunteered to staff the activities. And it was messy, but it was fun. And I think I heard that they had over 300 people participate, served dinner. So it was a great example of the kind of family engagement we're doing in the district. Our next items are our consent agenda, items 5.1 through 8. Would any board member like any item removed from the consent agenda for separate consideration?
Move approval.
Second?
It has been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The consent agenda has been approved. Our next agenda item is our focus topic, Rethinking Funding Proposal Presentation. This is the first in a series of meetings where we will be discussing this topic in preparation for a board action in December. Superintendent Patel.
Thank you. If I could ask Ms. Sam to hand me, actually, John, can you guys, let's actually have you just hang out for 1 second, just so you don't have to sit here while I go through this, and then we've got some colleagues that are gonna come up and dig into some of the details, but I'm gonna try and do a fairly quick overview, and then I'm thrilled to have the 3 colleagues that are gonna be coming up. So, this is an important beginning of a relatively speedy decision process that builds on a pretty lengthy initiative. As board members are well aware, we have 15 building blocks in our strategic plan, and the one represented there at the base, not very poetically called modifying funding formulas, is one of the most important. As we did the strategic planning work during the 2021-2022 school year, the big idea that came out of what we called our Economic Engine Working Group was that we need to find ways to allocate our financial resources and our human resources tied to student needs and ultimately student outcomes. And that might sound like a no-brainer, but that is not the way most K-12 schools, and I would argue many institutions of higher education, actually staff the educational process. Now, we waited until the 3rd year of the strategic plan to address this issue because we didn't want the cart to drive the horse, or whatever your preferred analogy is, when it comes to the academic agenda versus the funding agenda. And so the work that we have done on multi-tiered systems of support and on post-secondary readiness and on mental health and on leadership development for our school principals has by design preceded this work. That is nowhere near complete, as we just heard in the Comprehensive Achievement and Civic Readiness report, but we have some early promising gains. And now it has been time to go back to that core idea of allocating our resources to achieve those academic, social, emotional, and developmental outcomes that we have for kids. So, tonight starts that ambitious process that we hope will culminate in a vote of this board on December 17th. One question, I think, is why are we launching this process with a relatively intensive month of 4 school board meetings and input in between them? The short answer is the referendum's results needed to precede this process for us to have a clear understanding of what we were working with. I'm not even sure I would have recommended moving forward with this process had the referendum not passed. I'm not positive about that because I could have seen 2 schools of thought on that. But we all know that were we cutting up to $20 million for next year, to think about the innovative reallocation of funding and staffing would have been a lot for our system to bear. The other reason that this timeline is relatively tight is that John Carlson and Andy Krogstad and the team in our finance office, as well as Carl and our HR department, need to begin the staffing and budgeting process in January in order to have a full budget proposal ready for you by June. And that, as board members know, that is a very labor-intensive process. So we're beginning tonight with an overview of what we're now calling the balanced budget model that I will walk you through in just a moment. A video version of the presentation that I'm giving now will go out tomorrow to all of the administrators who are now a part of our district leadership group. And that includes our school principals, assistant principals, and all of our central office directors, executive directors, cabinet members. And so the first step in this process is going to be getting their feedback on a written feedback form where we're really going to ask them to roll up their sleeves and give us their best thinking, their best questions. We would then, after Thanksgiving, will be convening a number of discussion forums where we can probe into particular issues more deeply that emerge from those administrators who are the people who are most knowledgeable about our school budgets. That effort will result in a version 2 of the proposal. It's not impossible that version 2 will be the same as version 1. I actually don't anticipate that. I think there'll be refinements in the model. We will present that version 2 to you on December 3rd at the school board meeting, and then we will send another video and a summary of that model out to all staff, inviting their feedback on that we will use to incorporate in a version 3 of the model that we will share with you in December. Now, really critically, this is a conceptual model. This is your marching orders to us. There will be many details and issues to work through over the course of the months between January and June as we develop the actual budget proposal for the 2025-2026 school year. So what we're asking for over the next month is your decision on the model. And as we all know, the devil is often in the details, and we will have many months between January and June to refine that model and enhance what we're seeing as we begin to go even deeper into what this new approach would entail. You are scheduled to vote on that budget June 17th, and that is, of course, the point where, should you choose to adopt this model, it would formally go into implementation. So we're really being very deliberate here. And even though this tight series of 4 school board meetings requires us to execute on the process that's summarized on the slide in pretty rapid fashion, there will be many opportunities for refinement and improvement after that vote. Really importantly, a precursor to this new funding and staffing model is a new school continuous improvement process that will also debut in the winter of 2025, and that's also part of our strategic plan. I know that graphic means nothing to any of you, although our chair, of course, in her usual fashion, dissected all of it in great detail when I shared it with her.
I had to blow it up.
You had
so
to blow
I
it
can
up.
see it.
The big picture is that we're on the cusp of a significant change in our school improvement timelines and processes that would, should you approve this model, be, I believe, empowered by a different approach to staffing and budgeting. So this new SKIP process, of course, will be aligned with a new strategic plan, which is really just around the corner. Our current strategic plan goes through 2025, and so current plans are to begin the development of that plan in the summer and fall of 2025, hopefully with the board's approval before 2026. The new SKIP process would include a much more rigorous needs assessment that is driven by both data and broad stakeholder input, including family and community input on the needs of our schools. It would be a 3-year process as opposed to an annual process, where the heavy lifting is done once every 3 years and the plan is updated annually. And likely, we have schools on a 3-year cycle, so we're supporting 1/3 of the schools in the district every year in developing their continuous improvement plan so that we have the capacity to provide intensive support to schools in that process of their needs assessment and development of their strategies. Unlike in our current SKIP process, where schools essentially adopt a district-defined goal and a district-defined initiative, in this version 2.0, schools will set their measurable goals using data that we will provide, tied to that dashboard that I mentioned a moment ago is going to debut in early 2025. And schools will be determining the improvement initiatives and action steps that they need to achieve. There's a lot of that happening right now, but essentially our current system is one in which they are choosing from district-defined goals and initiatives. This puts the decision-making authority at the site level with central office support. Those SKIPs will be developed by school improvement teams that include teachers, ESPs, potentially parents, and we will codify that as part of the process. Principals have a key role to play in those teams, but that is where we're going to have a really important task of building consensus around priorities for school improvement. And here's where we begin to turn to the subject tonight, which is the budget process. The big idea here is that the budget supports the skip, which again sounds like a no-brainer, but I would submit, having worked with K-12 systems all across the country, that rarely happens. The improvement priorities are usually separate from how you actually allocate your dollars, which in an educational setting are mostly staff costs. And so that the budgets would be tightly aligned to the priorities of those skips. In order to do that, and to have our schools setting goals and planning improvement initiatives that are tied to their student needs, we really need to have increased flexibility to allocate those human and financial resources to meet those goals. And then finally, the support that we're working very hard to continually improve from the central office would be both informing the development of their plans and ultimately approving it using criteria that the school board would establish. So that is all ahead. It's not the subject tonight, but I think you'll see why it's related to this proposal for funding and staffing. So if you flash back to last year, we engaged a technical assistance firm, Afton Partners, and you'll meet a couple representatives of that firm at your study session in December. And we engaged in a process that had three broad components. The first was really baselining the current state, convening both our Community Budget Advisory Committee and an expanded group of stakeholders who provided some broad conceptual engagement. We conducted interviews of all of our school principals and many of our central office department heads. Then we moved into option development and refinement. What are the paths forward for a new model? And in the last several months, we have been deep in the weeds of modeling and analysis, and it's one of many reasons why the three folks who are just about to come up here are going to take over for me after I get through this overview, because they have been deep into those details. As we shared with you in one of the earlier board discussions of this, there's a somewhat oversimplified, but I think not inaccurate way to think of how school districts make decisions. At the far green side is highly centralized decision-making, in which the decisions are really made at the central office level. Then at the other extreme, in the blue box, is highly autonomous decision-making, in fact, in which maybe in its extreme form, the only thing that is articulated is legal compliance, that as long as the school is meeting the state, federal, local legal requirements, they can allocate things however they want. That might be the charter school in its purest form. And then there's a hybrid in that orange box where you have a mix of decisions that are made centrally and made at the site level. When Afton Partners graphed RPS, you can see they put us much closer to the centralized decision-making bucket than to the highly autonomous. This proposal retains significant elements of our current structure with some changes that obviously deserve discussion starting tonight and moving forward. These are the criteria that you approved for this rethinking funding effort a number of months ago, last spring. It should be effective, efficient, equitable, coherent, predictable, transparent, and responsive. I believe that we have adequately met those criteria, so that I am confident in the recommendation that we're putting before you and also our stakeholders starting tonight, though over the next months and even beyond that, I'm sure it can be enhanced in each of these areas. But just to briefly hit how I think we've met the charge that you gave us, in terms of effectiveness, the use of funding would be tied much more closely than in our current system to measurable goals and initiatives that are set and determined at the site level. In terms of efficiency, we would retain very significant components of our funding and staffing that would be staffed at the central level, where efficiencies of scale across the whole system are a much more effective way to use our resources. Special education programming, multi-language learner programming, and all of our school operations, custodial, nutrition services, things like that are managed more efficiently across the system. In terms of equity, you will see that we are making some recommendations for shifts in those funding streams that are tied to support our students who have additional needs, in particular federal Title I, compensatory aid from the state of Minnesota, achievement and integration aid from the state of Minnesota. I'm recommending that more schools receive those dollars than currently do, and that they receive more of them. and so that there is an increased allocation of those dollars tied to students who live in poverty and face other challenges to educational success. We've tried also for coherence by going back to the original and statutory intended purposes of all of these funding streams and trying to make sure that we're using the dollars for the purposes that they were intended to in both RPS policy and state and federal statute. The proposal would be predictable in that it would be formula-driven, and it will be based upon allocation rules that would be very clearly articulated, and so it would not be a system in which decisions made down here in the Edison building for reasons people don't understand are driving funding and staffing, but they would be based upon those rules that articulate how the dollars should flow. That is a strength of our current system. It's something that our staff deserves great credit for maintaining. That's not the case in a lot of school districts. There was a school district that I worked in years ago where we discovered inequities in school allocations that nobody could explain why they existed, but they'd been built into the budgets of certain schools and not other schools. And people would say, well, it's just always been that way. That's not been our starting point in RPS, which actually I wasn't sure about going into this process, and that's a great starting point to be. We're not trying to clean up historical mysteries and inequities in how the dollars are being allocated. Because that's difficult, because people start using those dollars to meet the needs of their kids, and it's very hard to unpack that once those system gaps exist. I think we've met the intent on transparency, and in particular, that would be the work that would be lying ahead of us if you approve a final version of this model. We purchased a couple years ago a new software platform called Allocate. We've been piloting it for the last couple of years. This model's implementation would really put that into light speed, where we would be using software that I think will both enable better decision making for people who develop budgets. They can run more scenarios, and better tracking of expenses to budget in real time, over time. And then we will have clear documentation of what the final version of the model is, and creating, as we often talked about during the referendum, dashboards where our stakeholders can look at the use of those resources. And then finally, a model that I believe is responsive, and in particular in articulating the role of diverse stakeholders in the development of those school improvement plans that set the priorities for our budgets. So here it is. And this is a table that is not encyclopedic, which is to say the positions that are listed here are not all of the positions that would be impacted by this model. It would have been impossible to include them all along those lines. But to understand this core model, the black line that's at the top is actually really important. It's small graphically, but very important in terms of the model itself, which is to say the first three categories all exist in schools. They're people, dollars, programs that are at what we often call the building level. It's only the last category that is at the central office level where where I sit and where many of our central administrative functions sit. So if you break these categories down, again, just staying at that top highest level, there are positions in schools that would be required in this model, very similar to how we require many of those positions now. There would be positions in schools that would be more flexible and school managed significantly differently from how we manage them now. Then there would be positions that, once again, are in schools that would continue to be centrally managed, as most of them are now. And then there would be a clearer delineation of central office budgets and the total cost of central office in this model as well. So if you look at those first three categories, there's two subcategories in each. Within the district required, you can see there are certain administrative functions that schools just need to run. A lead principal, certain critical clerical positions, an activities director at the high school level. Those would be allocated as FTEs, largely as they're allocated at present. Similarly, in our general ed bucket, we have our allocation of teaching positions and counseling positions at the secondary level that are currently allocated based on student enrollment by FTE, and according to our class size limits at the elementary level and our student to teacher total ratio at the secondary level. Those would also continue to be allocated centrally, but would exist in buildings. The logic of that approach is we can continue to say there's an educational program that is in common across RPS. Essentially, what we teach and who teaches it and who delivers that core educational program would remain quite similar to our current approach, enabling us to say it's common. Now, over time, might we launch new courses? Might we shift some of our educational models? Of course, but in this proposal, that educational program would still continue to be centrally allocated to the site levels. So the school managed piece is where you get into some greater flexibility. And as you can tell, if you look at the illustrative positions that are listed there, the best way to think of this category is learning supports. They are the positions, programs, resources that support that central educational program that would continue to be held in common across the system. And those categories, those school managed positions fall into two broad categories. One, those that are very focused on instruction, the educational enterprise, and those that are providing other incredibly valuable supports for students. So you can see in that instructional support when a school lowers class size, maybe because they have additional compensatory education aid or Title I funding, that's a flexible resource that they are choosing to use in that way. We also, you can see, have got assistant principals, clerical, general education, education support professionals, instructional coaches, the supply budget that our schools receive, and a professional development budget that they receive. In the student support side, you can see that we've got social workers, equity specialists, resiliency specialists, family engagement specialists, community education facilitators. Now, those positions, it's important to say, schools, based on their enrollment, could choose to preserve as they exist. And so whenever you advance change like this, I think the mind understandably goes to what if everybody cuts those positions? I think it is a disservice to the incredible people in those positions to assume that necessarily would happen. But sites would have more flexibility to make decisions tied to their school improvement goals under this model. Those are the positions that have grown the fastest over the past decade plus in RPS. When I've shown that graph that this board has seen of the fact that our growth in staff has grown by 31%, but our student enrollment grew by 7%, I have many teachers in particular who've said to me, my class sizes seem the same, where's the growth? And it has not only been in those positions, but it's been significant. That's not to say they don't provide incredible value, but this proposal would have the decision-making on those positions more tied to the school level within parameters and allocation rules that would be established, and I'll come to some of those in just a moment. The centrally managed positions would continue to be our special education teachers, our multi-language learning teachers, our mental health practitioners, and some funding for professional development on the instructional support side, and then our operational positions, very critically custodians, security, transportation, nutrition services, health office staff. We would continue to staff those because, as I said at the outset, that's where there are a lot of efficiencies of scale. And the central office functions would continue to be, as they are now staffed here. I'm excited that in this new system, we would be able to articulate more clearly the budgets that exist within the central office and frankly, the total cost of central office to the school district. So, two hypothetical examples of how this might work in practice. They're totally hypothetical, and you know that because we don't have a Mr. Spring, who's an elementary principal in Rochester, but you can see if this model were approved and implemented, we would continue to allocate staff to that elementary school for the core purpose of class size, quite similar to the way we do it now, aiming for our class size targets, adding staff or reversing staff as enrollment, removing staff as enrollment shifts. The school managed would provide that elementary school with a distributed set of resources, including a flexible position FTE rule that you'll see in a moment and that some of my colleagues can describe in greater detail if you have some interest. You also would see flexible use of those categorical dollars like Title I funding to meet the needs of those students who need additional support. That hypothetical elementary school will still be allocated their special ed teachers, their ML teachers, ESPs, as they currently are now. We know those students are highly mobile sometimes across the district. They're dispersed across the district. We would continue to staff that centrally. And then the central office positions, as I've said a couple times, would continue to be, of course, allocated here. At the secondary school level, similarly, there'd be a set of district level, district required positions. You'd have the staff that would be allocated as they are now to ensure that our teachers don't see more than 160 students in a day as per our contract with Rochester Education Association. And we would continue to maintain a ratio for sure of 4 counselors per high school because it really is absolutely essential to the high school program. Similarly, there would be a secondary schools allocation and that flexible position FTE rule, as well as those categorical funding sources that would provide high schools and middle schools with that more flexible funding, and similar approach to the centrally managed positions and central office positions. So, this table really shows the simplest statements we could produce for how several key buckets of funds would be allocated under this new model. The general fund, as I've said, probably at too great a length, would fall into those 4 categories: district required, school managed, centrally managed, and central office. And schools would receive that flexible position funding. Elementary school, 1 FTE, flexible position for every 105 students. Middle school, 120 for 129 students, and high school, 141 students. We can certainly talk about the differences in those levels. The core idea is that secondary programming, and the state of Minnesota recognizes this in how it funds schools, costs more money to provide than elementary programming. Compensatory education revenue, which is funding from the state of Minnesota that is currently allocated based on free and reduced price lunch status. And since breakfast and lunch are now free, the state is going to have to come up with a new way to measure poverty, and this is a huge issue for Minnesota schools. And I'm hoping that there is really good thinking going on at the state level about the ways to do that, because we're all held harmless for another year, and then that could be a significant issue for school districts everywhere. How do we measure the number of students that we serve whose families qualify as low income? State law currently requires us to allocate 80% of those to the school sites. The proposal that I'm putting before you is to allocate 100%. But to be very tight about the 9 uses of funding that schools are authorized to use compensatory education aid for. Those are essentially 9 uses that are tied to students who need additional support to overcome challenges of poverty and other needs. Candidly, that would be somewhat of a departure for the way some of our schools have, in some instances, used compensatory education aid. Since I've been in Rochester, I've heard many principals in central office say, well, I'm going to use compensatory to buy back a position that I might have had to cut, for instance, due to enrollment decline. That's not the way it's intended to be used. It's not a flexible pot to buffer you against other financial challenges. It's additional funding for students who live in poverty and face additional needs. And so that is, on the whole, the way our schools are using it now, but we would get tighter, and we would say you really need to demonstrate that one of the 9 authorized uses is how those dollars, but we would increase the percentage that we're allocating directly to the site level. Title I is funding that the federal government allocates, again tied to free and reduced price lunch status, to provide support for students who live in poverty and have additional needs. There are an array of different options that school districts have to allocating that Title I allocation. In Rochester, for a number of years, we have concentrated those dollars in a relatively small number of elementary schools and then a few secondary schools, like currently our Alternative Learning Center, that have poverty rates of 75% or more. You have to serve at that level. And then there's some level of discretion where you want to go. My sense of the way Rochester has done it in the past was the idea that if we concentrate those dollars at the elementary level, those students, as they move to middle and high school, will have that head start, and it will be sustained as they move up through the grades. I believe, not just in Rochester but elsewhere, we've seen that that actually rarely works. and that in fact what kids need is a balanced set of interventions, starting for sure with a great early childhood and elementary, but moving into middle and high school. And so the proposal is to shift from concentrating that funding, Title I funding, in our elementary schools to allocate it to middle schools and high schools as allowed by statute. State of Minnesota allocates achievement and integration aid for the purposes, as the title suggests, of supporting kids whose achievement is lower than we would hope it would be, and promoting racial integration both within and among districts. So every district has to have an achievement and integration plan. Ours is focused, tied to our current strategic plan, on 3 priorities: post-secondary and career readiness, especially for students from backgrounds that are underrepresented in higher education and high skill careers, increasing the percentage of teachers in our district who are teachers of color, and our multi-tiered systems of support in literacy. So those are our 3 approved plans. Our plan is up next year, and so we will need to, by state requirement, do a new plan. So the proposal for achievement and integration is we would continue to retain $400,000 to support the central work, things like the Zello work that was referenced tonight several times. But we would also allocate that to sites to support positions that meet the criteria of achievement and integration aid. We need to make sure that those dollars are used for the purposes that are authorized in our plan, which would be work that Andy and the finance office would do, frankly, behind the scenes, that principals don't have to map the dollars to the funding source. We would make sure we could report to the state that we're using those dollars tied to our plan. We're almost there. I know this is a ton of me here tonight. Important change in how we are funding and staffing students who take classes that offer a post-secondary credit. And for us, those are 3 biggies: post-secondary enrollment options, CTEC, and PTEC. PSEO for Rochester Public Schools is mostly at Rochester Community and Technical College, but not exclusively. Students can go, and the design of the funding model at the state level is that those dollars go to the college. What Rochester has been doing for a long time is we hold the high school harmless. And so we fund RCTC and our comprehensive high schools. That is not sustainable given the number of our students, as we saw in the earlier report, who are taking a class that has offers college credit. For us to essentially fund PTEC, CTEC, or PSEO and not reduce the allocation to the high schools is essentially to double dip. Now we know that kids choose to take a PSEO class or a CTEC class, somewhat less than PTEC because it's a vertical program. 1 year they might do it, 1 year they might not. So we would not reallocate those dollars every single year. We'd use a 3-year average so that the high schools can plan for a predictable amount of staffing reduction that would be caused because they are not teaching those students. This is the way PSEO works in the vast majority of districts I've ever encountered. I was surprised in Rochester when I got here that we were doing it. Maybe in the early years it made sense because you didn't want to create a disincentive for the high schools to encourage kids to take PSEO, but we simply are not funded to fund both at the levels of students taking those classes that we currently have. And then finally, staff development. The state of Minnesota requires that 2% of our general fund be set aside for that, so it's a significant amount of money. We would be, in the current proposal, having 30% for those district-wide initiatives like the work that Mona and the team were talking about around our current work around wit and wisdom. But we would be allocating 70% to the sites based on their FTE, the number of staff that they serve. But we would say that those allocations, both at the site and central level, need to tie to their SCIP plans and need to tie to the district's strategic plan. So many people who read the long memo that I sent you last week either jumped to the table at the end or eventually found it. And that was predictable because it is a table that projects what would happen at the school level given our current approach to funding and staffing, given the balanced budget model in the future state, and then given the difference between the two. There's a really important set of points to make about that table that I'm also going to be stressing with our administrators tomorrow and that we'll stress in all the outreach that we'll conduct about this. The first is, yes, it is true. Some schools would see increases in the funding they have available. That increase would mostly be due to those changes we've talked about in Title I and compensatory and achievement and integration aid. It would mostly be the shift in how we use those dedicated categorical funding sources. Now, unless a school has got declining enrollment, they're serving fewer kids, in which case, of course, the need for the funding is somewhat less, although kids don't leave schools one class at a time, so it's always a difficult trick to adjust enrollment, funding for declining enrollment. For almost all of our schools, the funding that they will receive that increases their funding in other areas would allow them to manage the areas in which they see decreases. And so this is not a proposal to hemorrhage the district or any of our schools in really dramatic ways. Really importantly, the referendum funding that was the focus of the last several months of our work is included in this model, but as we said to our community many times, that is not funding for new programs and positions. It is to maintain stability for RPS. So that brings us to this final key point. When people look at that list of school funding increases, it doesn't mean that is a, for instance, $300,000 increase that can be spent on new stuff. It includes the inflationary increase that is required every year for increased costs for salary, benefits, utilities. And so that increase has to cover the increased expenses that are there. So there are schools in this proposal that would see increases, and I think that that's an exciting thing. But that last column should not be read as entirely new money. It's money that has to also cover increased expenses, as is the case every year when we do our budget. So we come back to this point as kind of a reminder of the journey that we're on. I want to invite Denise and Andy and John to come back with apologies for my request. I wanted to save you sitting there while I did this long monologue, actually, and give the board a chance in particular to hear from the three of you and any questions or thoughts that they have. I think the final point that I will end on is the reason that I decided to call this the balanced budget model, which is, again, just a working title to give us something to call it, is really twofold. The first is that I think it does achieve a balance between decision-making at the school level and the system level that is pretty exciting, that has got some resources at the building level to be meeting the needs of their unique students while maintaining efficiencies and a common educational program across the district. I think it's also balanced in the sense that I believe that it will help us balance our budget, that it maintains those efficiencies centrally, and it will empower our schools to find greater efficiencies as they're closer to what's working for kids and where they actually might say, yeah, we could live without that because this is a bigger need. So thank you for that opportunity to talk through that long monologue. There's much more in the memo that's there, and I want to thank John and Denise and Andy for the work they have done with members of their team. We've also had other folks on our core team who've helped do this thinking. The input process that we're about to begin is an authentic one. I'm sure we will see some things we didn't see. I anticipate that the versions 2 and 3 of this proposal that we will bring you will be different. If we got it so right the first time out, I would not be unpleased, but I think that's highly unlikely. So we're listening. We're listening, and it's a tight timeline, but I think it's a timeline that's doable. So, Madam Chair, I'll turn it back to you. Try to stay out of the discussion for a while.
Well, board members, as I said, this is the first of multiple times that we're going to discuss this. So I think whatever questions you have tonight that might be needed for your clarification or information or any comments on the process, I think that's what we're going to focus on tonight. Does anybody want to start? Director Mervin.
Thank you, and thank you. I have always been a real proponent of autonomy for teaching staff and for schools for that matter. And we've seen over the years we've had individual schools and staff for that matter come up with some really cool programs, Step into Learning and Zebrafish and you know, all kinds of innovations that have often spread to other schools too. That said, my concern with this is especially at the secondary level. Couple of things. I understand that we're sort of double dipping when we're funding CTEC, PTEC, and RCTC programs. And that financially, that's a challenge. If we don't continue doing that, though, if schools are being told you're staffing, and what I understand is that staffing, you'll get less money for staffing or whatever, because of the number of kids from your school who are doing these post-secondary or these career options, you'll have less funding at your school for staffing. So my two concerns with that: one, are we going to quit kind of encouraging kids to explore CTEC, to take college in the schools or whatever, because that's going to cost that high school more? And secondly, and I guess this is my really big concern, especially when high schools have the option of deciding where those funds are going to be spent, where the staffing is going to happen, is it possible that one school can just decide, you know what, art and music, not so important? Or maybe, this year even there was auto mechanics. We don't need that. We don't have a whole lot of kids who are interested in that, so we're just not going to offer those. And when the majority of the staff say, yep, fine, maybe for that school it makes sense, but my concern is for the kids who are attending that school and they can't transport to another school or to another program. Will they never have the opportunity to have those kind of experiences that kids, high school kids at another school might have? And I hope I'm thinking about this wrong. But, I've said before, my concern is, are we going to have, especially at the high school level, magnet schools, where one school is great at this and another school is great at something else, which is terrific. But if you're a student who can't get to that school, which is offering the kind of programs you want, you're kind of sunk. So if you just give me a real quick answer, that'd be great.
Go ahead, Denise.
The change in the allocation actually isn't very different than how we do it right now. And I can let both of these speak too, because they're more involved in that process. But we currently allocate a certain FTE per number of students. And that process remains the same in this new model. So that is still under the district required. That is still, that didn't change when we moved to this new model from the way we've budgeted in the past.
That's correct. And actually, in the last week or so, we've had discussions about what we're kind of internally calling right-sizing that FTE allocation to the secondary schools, so that we've done the math. Mr. Carlson led this effort, and we've now begun to think about and implement it, where perhaps the FTE ratio allocation, student to teacher FTE ratio allocation was slightly off, in that we maybe weren't allocating properly now to begin with. For example, when I came on board a couple of years ago, we had just reduced our ratio to give less FTE to the secondary schools as a budget reduction effort. As we ran through the calculations now using those same numbers, it appears that perhaps we were still under, even with the budget reductions, perhaps under allocating FTE based on the needs of the students in the building, based on the number of the number of students that a teacher can see in a day. And so when we did those calculations, we actually realized we may need to increase their allocated FTE. So as we ran through those numbers, we believe what's going to happen is that they're going to see an increase in that allocation based on their enrollment that would almost entirely offset what would be reduced on the back end for PTEC, PSEO, and CTEC. It's really a shifting of those dollars, but at the end of the day, there will be a little bit of reduction at the high schools, but not what we believe to be the entirety of what would be lost to PSEO, PTEC, and CTEC.
Okay, so that's helpful, but just especially at the high school with the electives, if a school decides for whatever reason, we're just not gonna do those anymore, you know, because we don't have a whole lot of kids who wanna do those. What happens to those, maybe it's only 30, 50 kids at that school who, that's really important to them, and they're simply not gonna have the same opportunities that kids somewhere else at another school has. Or, you know, a school deciding, this school really needs more focus, even this high school, on helping kids who struggle with reading. And because we're gonna put more of our allocation there, we're just not gonna do this other stuff. And there may not be an answer for that right now, but I'm really concerned about that.
Yeah, let me jump in. I think there's a fairly fundamental misunderstanding.
Okay.
That the educational program is largely, as Denise was saying, current state. Schools now do choose not to offer a section when the enrollment is not adequate. And I have to say, while I love electives too, I'd love to see more, we have in our high schools, I'm just sticking with high schools, we have students who can't read.
Yeah.
And we cannot fund the interventions if we run class sizes of 13 for something. It's a direct trade-off. We do not have the interventions for our struggling kids. And there's no two ways to have both. We cannot run sections of a class where, as wonderful as it is, it doesn't attract, you know, sufficient numbers. So that enrollment-based piece is just the hard, you know, decisions that I know you know well from your careers, you know, in schools. But there's nothing in this proposal that would say you, high school X, you would choose to stop doing art, because that's in the educational program. It's the learning supports that are flexible. So it's those positions that are essentially outside that educational offering that sites would have greater flexibility with. So the reason a high school now would, in this model, and now not offer something that's in our course catalog is insufficient enrollment, which we have happen at present, where we just can't afford to staff the class. We could probably do a better job of recruiting kids and things like that. So in the current model, that program, the educational program, would be preserved. And the flexibility would be in the supports that we provide for those students in that program. Now, going forward, I do think there's a deep discussion for us to have about the merits of having an educational program that is uniform across our high schools. But that's not in this proposal at present. I was at two of our high schools last week and happened to have passionate discussions with two separate people about bringing welding back into the high schools, not going to CTEC. Now you have to go to CTEC. Passionate people making a case. Interestingly, in the conversations from one person, for girls being incredibly interested in welding. And they were saying, we got to stop sending kids across town to do that. We could have that discussion about all three high schools, or maybe we have a high school that has the facility to add a welding lab and, you know, a teacher or staff that really wants to do it, and students really want to take it. And so we would have to have an important discussion about whether welding should be in all three high schools or one high school could have it. But there's nothing in this model that changes that. That's really the next work of the next strategic plan, is deciding how should the educational program change. This model largely allocates funding tied to the current state for that. Does that seem to? It's a critical point, so I really appreciate you asking for that that clarification.
Maybe it would help. I'm sorry. I was going to just suggest that perhaps a couple of examples of positions that would be in that flexible might at the high school level might be a student or a resiliency specialist, an instructional coach, a success coach, not those what we would consider course teachers. And so that's an example of what would be flexible.
And to build on that question, what I hear you saying is that you really can't cross the streams when you look at the chart. So if a school is assigned a certain amount of music teachers because that's how students were enrolled in the music courses, they can't then say, well, you know, we're only going to offer beginning music because I need 2 more social workers. You're not gonna let them cross the columns. If I'm looking at your chart, you're not gonna let them cross the columns.
They can't cross the columns, but also there would be the same discussion, and I know, I look out at Heather Willman here, who works with our high schools on these issues. If a high school just decided to stop offering orchestra or something, we would have.
That's painful. You just voted me off the island.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not, we would be having an educational discussion about the course offerings, because it's in the course catalog. And we'd be saying, wait a minute, this is in our course catalog, it's an approved offering, we offer this. Why can't you offer it? We can't get kids to take it, there's no way, we've tried. Okay, maybe you can't offer it. But to say we're just gonna stop teaching something would be an educational discussion that we'd be having with the schools. Or we wanna launch something new, and then they propose it in the course guide and you all approve it
Right.
eventually.
So that's still part of the board's purview, is to approve the offerings that are in the course catalog. And then that reflects on how you do the staffing after registration. Okay. Anybody else? Director Cook?
So kind of a related question, I think, to Dr. Marvin's, but asking it slightly different. In the lead up to the referendum, a lot of us got pretty used to talking about the advanced learning and learning enrichment programs and opportunities, and then contrasting that or also talking about programs to provide student support. And it sounds to me, in broad strokes anyway, that this proposal would allow school-level autonomy for a lot of those school supports. While they'd be maintained, they might take slightly different forms at each school. But for the advanced learning options and programs and perhaps even to some extent electives, where do those live within this framework? Where are those, are those the, well, yeah, that's my question. Where are they reflected here?
Advanced learning is in the district allocated, so we would be giving sites an allocation to provide advanced learning services within their facilities. We're working with Laura Willis, who handles advanced learning, to understand what that ratio and what that formula looks like today, but we would follow those same processes we have today in terms of allocating that, so they would need to use that allocation in that specific manner, such that they do today. So that's unchanged. That would not be what we would consider flexible.
They could add to it. There was always that option of adding to it if they had flexible money and they wanted to stack on top of it. But what Andy's saying is we're giving a base that is the same as what we do today.
Okay.
I also wanted to just make sure that the way the plan is designed as of today, I think John hit on it slightly, is that you can't take, when we provide an allocation, that's how it's to be used. They can ultimately cross, as you said, Chair Nathan, they could cross columns from flexible and perhaps offer additional courses that support their allocation, but it wouldn't be the other way around. So they could enhance their allocations, but they couldn't reduce their allocations.
If I may, Chair Nathan, there are certain terms, I have a affinity for simple terms that sometimes can cause problems. The term I was using was core. And core was sounding to some people like some subjects are core and some are not. And so I'm trying to say the educational program, which is core. So the other simple term I'm trying not to use, because the Afton folks helped us create that table, which is wonderful, is fixed and flex. But when we talk about this, looking at spreadsheets, and my eyes blur much faster than theirs when we do that, advanced learning would be fixed as opposed to flex. And so that's a simple nomenclature to think about that. In that first category, and this again gets to your question, the educational program is largely fixed in how we allocate it. I don't want to sound like we don't change our educational program, though. We're just talking about budget allocations. We're doing a lot of innovative things educationally. The flex would be in those learning supports in this version of the proposal.
Do you have a follow-up, or?
It's a different question.
Okay, then I'll let Director Barlow go. We'll swing back around.
So two things. In terms of resources at schools and continuing the inquiry about advanced learning to include now PSEO, CTEC, PTEC, two different things. But where would they fall in terms of the 4 categories: district required, school managed, centrally managed, central office? Just as a means of helping me to understand.
Bring up that chart. Is your question advanced learning?
Sure.
So the advanced learning would be, and you guys jump in right now and correct me, they'd be in that general ed district required. PTEC and CTEC are, in a certain sense, special programs that this doesn't really apply to. Similar Phoenix, and with a very different kind of kid. We're continuing to allocate those. They essentially are they in a central office, like nomenclature? They're going to continue to be fully funded by the current funding sources that support them. The change for PTEC and CTEC actually doesn't change the amount of funding PTEC and CTEC gets. It modestly reallocates some of the funding from the high schools to reflect the fact that the kids are not there when they're doing it, but then in a 3-year average, not a year-to-year fluctuation.
Okay. And then finally, unrelated to what I just asked, so there currently is discussion with a new presidential administration soon to take place, either the complete elimination of the Department of Education or a revision of. Have you given any thought as to the potential impact and how that might affect this current balanced budget model that you're considering? Or is that more of a wait and see, and then we'll go from there?
I can speak directly to Title I, which is one of the federal programs that is reflected in this plan. And we did have some conversations with the Department of Education. And even because the funding is a year forward, like we're good, and they said that even if there is a change and it happens quickly, which nothing tends to happen very quickly with the federal government, that it would still be through the next 2 school years that we would have title funding because of the way the allocation works. So we have had some initial conversations. I think everybody is thinking about that, certainly at the state issue. It came up in one of our consultations as we were thinking about, changing around Title I. And so it's certainly a wait and see, but it wouldn't impact us for FY26 that we're planning for right now.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Cook, want to go back?
Yeah, so I really like the capacity for 3-year planning that's kind of built into this proposal, and allowing the schools the runway to make those kind of longer term plans. So I just wanted to name that I really think that's a nice feature that wasn't in the earlier versions of this that I saw. And then the other question I had was around the allocations per pupil at the different levels, elementary, middle, and high school. Just talk me through how you landed on specific numbers in this proposal isn't as interesting to me as just what that lower numbers at elementary versus the higher at high school, what's that reflecting, and what's the logic behind that?
We were talking a lot about that today, as a matter of fact. This ratio is designed from what we currently allocate. So in other words, what does our allocation guide say today? And the total that we allocate today is broken down by elementary, middle, and high. These numbers just reflect that percentage. So in other words, what we're doing today, if we looked at all of our allocations based on our FY25 budget, take that total and then divide it by the number of students at each of these levels, and that becomes the ratio that develops these new dollars. There is room for movement in that particular formula. It was just a measure for us to arrive at a starting point, but we could ultimately indicate that perhaps the ratios need to be higher or lower depending on a level, whether it's elementary, middle, or high. Some of those decision points I think still exist. This was simply just a starting point based on current allocations percentage of that across each of these sections, or each of these levels, and what that would equate to now in a pure, flexible allocation based on the dollars that we believe are available to allocate. So the dollars we have available to allocate is a set amount, and then the ratio of each of these levels, elementary, middle, and high school, produces 105, 129, 141, creates these ratios that we would then follow. So out of that total amount, that's how we're determining essentially how many FTE each of these levels can purchase. I didn't do it probably justice, but there's a formula behind it that says, ultimately says, of our dollars we have available and flexible, we're gonna split it like this. So for every 105 students at the elementary, they're gonna get an FTE. That FTE cost comes out of that flexible pot. If there's another 105 students, another FTE would be allocated. Those dollars come out of that flexible bucket of money that all three levels of schools share.
Okay, so it's both a reflection of the amount of student supports that would be captured in that, like, school-managed column, and also the costs of FTEs at those different levels? And
That is correct.
Okay.
These FTEs right now that this example is based on all teacher FTE. And we know that sites may choose to instead, you could hire 2 ESP EFTs for 1 teacher FTE. So we don't want to talk about it, we're not talking about it as much in FTE. We have to relate it to FTE right now, but ultimately we have a dollar amount that if we take that dollar amount, divide it by the number of teachers that we could pay for from that dollar amount, we arrive at these ratios then. And so that's the flexible component, is a principal could pick a teacher, a principal could pick an ESP, but the dollar amount they have available doesn't change. We're not allocating a head any longer, we're allocating some dollars that can be used in a certain way. We would also provide some flexibility to use those not necessarily on personnel, but perhaps on some non-personnel expenses as well, if they need some supplies or something to perhaps support an innovative program that they're trying to launch.
That's helpful, thanks.
Director Workman.
So will there be something that's considered to be an average FTE? For example, I could see principals who say, I have this amount of money, and if I move somebody else that's really expensive, maybe I can buy a person and a half for that. How will that be handled?
That is possible, of course, but I mean, I think with the contract that's in place and the rules, and this becomes a human resources issue, I think, and Carl's office would be part of that conversation about can a principal just move a teacher out so that they could ultimately pay, bring in 2, perhaps 1 or 1.5 lesser, less senior teachers.
Which would be complicated, because
Right.
then you'd say, well, I want this teacher, and I don't want that teacher, and I want somebody else, and
Right.
that, I mean, that can't, I wouldn't think that
The
that
oversight,
that could happen at the building level, but we'd have to have oversight from the central office.
right, and that would still be part of the staffing process that would still take place, where ultimately the human resources team and the site would work together to fill these FTE that we've allocated. So finance would allocate a certain number of FTE, the site and human resources would work together to identify the people that would go into those FTE, ensuring that the contract language is followed.
We've been really focused as a team on funding use and putting together this model, and what you're speaking about is definitely the next piece of work.
Yeah.
One of the
More
next pieces
the
of work that's in front of
implementation,
us is,
yeah.
right, what would implementation look like? What support would our building leaders need and skip teams need in order to be able to think about the model this way? How do those logistic questions, so that we have a draft of, that's still rough, of like, what would some of those processes be working in? We are starting to shift our attention to that. So it's a great question, and one that we're still working through as well.
I didn't expect definitive answers to everything tonight, for sure. But
Director McLaughlin.
I just want to provide the comment as a member of the Community Budget Advisory Committee with Director Cook, that seeing this come from where it started to now is a lot of work, I can see, and it's really exciting to see how this is going to evolve over the next couple months and over the next couple years.
So I think, Mr. Krogstad, you mentioned supply budgets in your last comment, and I think in the columns, I saw that those were in the flexible column, in that you're going to give as part of their allocation, they'll have an allocation that they are expected to use on what currently would be in the line item for supplies in the staffing model. What kind of changes, I guess, would we see between the kinds of directions that come centrally about money for supplies? I was also thinking curriculum, like, is the district gonna centrally pay for curriculum? What about individual curriculum choices that a building might make? We've heard a little bit about wit and wisdom, some schools doing supplementation. How is that gonna work?
So we have, if I could just explain it in this term, what we did is we're starting at the top. So what we've done is we've said, well, how much revenue will we have next year? Do we expect to have that we can use to fund our operation? From that amount, then we've carved off a few key initiatives, one of those being curriculum, for example, or other maybe special projects that we are deeming necessary. And then we begin the process of determining how much money we have to allocate to the schools, to central office, to centrally managed, all of those different categories. And so we are thinking about that, and that's something that is still in works as we work through the central office. But in terms of at the site level, we fully expect to still allocate site supply dollars like we do today based on enrollment. So the sites have a fair amount of discretion on how those dollars are spent. They can use those on some very specific software subscriptions that a particular teacher may want or need. It goes to funding their printing costs. There may be a contracted service they want to pay for. So those dollars, although fairly limited really in scope, they do have a fair amount of discretion at the site level about how those dollars are funded. What I was referring to with Director Cook is that if they determine they needed some additional beyond what we allocate, they could ultimately use from the school managed dollars to supplement perhaps some additional supplies, or maybe again a larger purchase that is necessary to start a new program within that school.
Sure. So supplies are in the flex, so they have to plan well. But they could spend supplies on positions. Like they could decide we are going to supplement, we're going to hire folks, and we're going to live without some of what we've called a supply. I mean, it's in that flex. Curriculum must be funded centrally. Now, curriculum is a fuzzy term because there are curricular materials that like individual teachers might want to buy and that schools choose to buy. So they are curricular. But one of the commitments in the referendum was $1.2 million a year ongoing for a core curriculum budget. It's an urgent need. It needs to be an ongoing process, not something that happens once a decade. The teachers are involved in continually saying, how is our curriculum working? What's out there? What's best practice? And so that's one of those things that I would say is a deep economy of scale. To have each school trying to think through curriculum is just beyond the scope of many of our schools. These people are incredibly busy. They're serving kids. They need to be involved in helping select and refine and improve curriculum. So while we are still, the first focus of this has been in getting what would the site allocation process be like. The central office allocations are almost as important in my view, and curriculum is number one. We paid for wit and wisdom with federal COVID dollars, and we purchased our new science curriculum with federal COVID dollars. Like, great school districts don't run that way. Like, we have to have dollars to continually give our teachers the best material to work with our kids. So that by the time we bring you a model in December, we will have a very clear answer for that one. I'm confident.
I have another one if nobody else does. We're so used to looking at our budget in the past in terms of FTEs per building. We've got the staffing guide that you show us, and then in the budget, you lay out all the FTEs, and then we have that chart that shows by school. And I'm sure that a lot of people who are looking at this are thinking, right now, my school has this many people that serve this many students. Are we gonna see radical changes in our buildings? You know, or suddenly they're gonna have 10 less people or 10 more people? I'm just trying to assuage anybody who's thinking about big shifts. I hear you saying this is based on what we're already doing, so I'm gonna anticipate your answer, but I'm gonna let you say it.
I think Dr. Piquel would agree. We're not expecting significant changes from current state, certainly in year one, as people become familiar with this new model and how it could potentially impact them in the future and how they could use, especially what we call flexible dollars. We're fully expecting some change, but not radical changes, as the level of comfort and capacity for our sites to think more long-term. Perhaps we're going to see some additional change at the FTE, but we're allocating a certain, again, for the core education components, we're allocating all of those positions, and so therefore we're allocating a greater percentage than what they would have available in flex. So therefore there isn't really the dollars available to make a huge swing one way or the other. Some though, yes.
And I would refer to page 14 of the memo if that question came up, because the reason we didn't report that in FTE is because sometimes it's difficult to determine, you know, some of them, there's different costs for different FTE. So when we looked at FTE and we translated all to teacher FTE, that wasn't a comparison that was helpful, right? Because not all of our staff make that salary. And so we did put it in dollars versus FTE, but we were trying to answer just that question, is what does this look like per school? So that is kind of why it's in dollars, and this is preliminary, right? We know that there's going to be a lot more versions. We're continuing to refine this even now. But that was really, we included that to answer that question. What does this look like for my school and per school?
I would say not radical, but meaningful. And if anybody who's been in a school, one position can be incredibly meaningful. You know, one thing I've said about the position of instructional coach is much debated, not just in Rochester, but in school districts all around the country. And there was a period 15 years ago where it spread like wildfire. Nobody had ever heard of an instructional coach, and then suddenly everybody had an instructional coach. It was part of a big reform movement. I sometimes say you've seen one instructional coach, you've seen one instructional coach. It's a position that is, and it's ill-defined in terms of the field, and some are invaluable. You talk to people, they would say, we can't operate without Susan or something, you know? And the flexibility to have a position like that can be highly meaningful to a school and not necessarily a huge share of the budget. So I think it's a great question. I appreciate it. No, there is not the flexibility in this for radical funding and staffing change, but I do believe there is for meaningful, where you would actually be able, especially tied to serving those kids who the state and federal government intend us to allocate more resources to serve. To some extent, no, to a significant extent, that has existed in our system, but I think without the rigor and precision that this proposal could bring to it. That those dollars are to accelerate the achievement of our kids who are struggling. But we've also been attentive to the well-being of our schools in this model who don't have that many students who generate those dollars. Like, we've been very attentive to make sure our schools that are not higher poverty schools are financially viable in this model. That was very important to, I think, what we want to be as RPS. And so, I don't want to oversell it, but I don't want to undersell it either, I think.
And then one thing that I know I'm not expecting an answer tonight, but that I'd like to maybe see as we hear more details about the implementation. I know you said that we were expecting our building leaders to make these flexible decisions based on the needs of their students, looking at their skips, looking at the data about what their community looks like. So some sense of where's the accountability? Like, where's the check on that decision making? And then also, how is the school community outside of staff going to be involved in either learning about or understanding the decisions that the building leadership makes? Are we going to require, like we had a public meeting tonight about ours, is each school going to be required to meet with their community or have, parent or caregiver input, before the decisions on the allocation are made? I probably don't have answers to that yet, but that'd be something.
Well, I've had quite a bit of experience with this, and the critical question comes, clearly, you need a range of staff on a skip team, no question. Parent involvement in a school improvement team is a very important discussion to have. Because on one hand, parents are right there, they're on the team. They are also not, professional educators, and do you want to literally have them on the team? Do you want to have a parent advisory structure that provides a perspective? What about student priorities? We just had two incredible students who were here earlier today. I'm sure they would have valuable opinions on the staffing structure of their high school. So that's a really important discussion. How do we structure that input process for the school improvement plan? It's some, Vince Wagner, our president of REA, and I meet regularly, and we were talking, the purpose of this proposal is not to shift from superintendent as dictator to principal as dictator. Nobody should be a dictator, even an enlightened one. So you need those structures that do make it more proximal. I mean, if you're a teacher and you have an idea, you can walk right into your principal's office, I hope, and that's not as easy to do with me. I wish it was, we try, but. So I think your point is really critical and mapping out that process. And school districts have had both success and struggles with parents and caregivers on those school improvement teams. And so that's a very important discussion, I think, that lies ahead of us. And sometimes students on those teams, too.
Board members, anything else for this first discussion? Because we have more to come. Director Garcia.
I think I'll just kind of second what you were saying. I wasn't really sure how to articulate it, but my initial reaction to this is I want the people who are going to have to now do this, if it gets implemented, to tell me whether they want to do that or not. And I think that the way that Chair Nathan sort of identified or spelled out sort of her question is the checks and balance of how the decisions are getting made, because I can absolutely appreciate if a principal and an assistant principal are getting together and they're like, you know what, we're having a lot of challenging behaviors, and we have a couple of people who are saying they want to do this sort of professional development to sort of help them manage their classrooms better. But if you're talking to the teachers, they're not going to professional development their way into becoming a mental health professional. So their response would then be like, why wouldn't we just want a mental health professional as one of those opportunities? And so I think that would be helpful to identify, like, what, not just, superintendent as dictator, now principal as dictator, but what is the feedback that they're receiving in order to make these changes? Because I think flexibility for the school, I would want that if I was an educator, but if I'm an educator, not school leadership, and I still don't get to make those decisions, and now it feels more personal because it's not you as the superintendent saying this is just how it's going to be, and now it's my building principal saying this is how it's going to be, but the decision it hurts more directly because because I've been in your office telling you this is what I want and need, and you literally just made a decision that is not the thing that I was asking for. How to manage that instead of not creating tiny cultures of discomfort and unrest, I guess, in the school system. Because I remember, and this is obviously not apples to apples, but I felt some type of way when the governor decided now it was going to be district decisions about what was going on with masks, because it was so easy for them to be like, nope, this is what he's saying, or this is whether we're going back to in-person learning or hybrid or whatever. And it felt entirely different when we had to make the decision for every single school in the district, knowing that each school probably had their own way or their own preference of how things, they were able to manage those things. And so I feel like I don't want this to become a burden on the principals I don't want it to become contentious for educators. I would like for the spirit of this to be the thing that actually happens. And so maybe that is what Chair Nathan is sort of suggesting, is like checking to make sure, like checking the temperature often enough to make sure that that is the case.
Well, thank you. We'll see you again. So board members, it's almost 7:30 and we have a number of other items on the agenda where we'd like to power through, or does anybody need a break?
I could go either way.
Yes? That's a-
I could go either
you
way.
go either way.
No one's getting up, so.
No, nope.
Maybe we just.
That's a no, we're powering through, okay. Our next item is monitoring 7.1, the Comprehensive Achievement and Civic Readiness Report. You heard the presentation during our public meeting, so this is an opportunity for the board to ask questions and discuss the report. And we can move it to submission to the state. Anybody have anything they wanted to raise? As Mona comes back to the table, Dr. Bartlett?
Yes. Heather, I think you had covered or presented the disciplinary literacy work. And you'd mentioned an example or two. I was curious, will there be writing labs and science, or analyzing primary and secondary sources in history? I mean, I just kind of went out there on my own to try to find examples, and I was curious as to what examples we might be coming up with.
Yeah, so I think one of the things we might see is in social studies more text sets. So instead of just reading from the textbook, you might have a primary source, you might have a letter, you might have a newspaper article. So you're building that understanding of like that concept in a little bit more broad way. In science, we see a lot of arguing from evidence. So can the student make an argument about why they think something's happening based on the evidence in front of them, and then back that up with, back their claim up, and then can they ask each other the questions to be able to kind of further that discussion? So less of the teacher saying, here's what's happening, and more facilitation of the students asking the questions is what we would see really in both of those content areas.
Okay, and then just two quick follow-ups. And I'm not sure it's for either of the four of you, but I know annually we have this requirement to present and see if there's a concern on the part of the public. Is there something we can do differently to gen up some interest, if you will, on the part of the public, so they can actually be more involved, aware, in tune? I like to actually see and hear from the public regarding, the plan. And then finally, just an inquiry. This past Sunday at church, there was a young family with several young children. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice to have access to resources or something that I could maybe make available to them to help them? And I was curious. I do see flyers out, ECFE. Do we have an ongoing deliberate effort, or DNF County Health, what they're doing to kind of reach out to our young families?
I think that's a great question. We do our best to market to the public, and we're connected through a lot of our community partners. So if you were connected to public health per se, they would also recommend connecting with us and other community partners who offer early learning offerings in the community. It might be the library if the family's really interested in connecting through reading. It might be playing at Spark if they're looking for an opportunity to engage in play in a different way. And so we definitely try and partner and collaborate in getting our message out and support one another through that. But I think we're always looking for new ideas to connect with families. So if you're hearing about what the community would like to engage in, we're always open to that because, quite frankly, my degree is in early childhood and not marketing. So I do the best I can when I come up with ideas as a parent of young children, but we don't always know what every family wants or needs. But if they're ever curious, they can always call our office, and whether it's us or someplace else in the community, we're happy to help be a connector.
Okay, thank you.
The other thing I might add is just that we're working on a family literacy hub. And that's a part of our work with structured literacy and the READ Act. So we're trying to think about what could we put at the fingertips of our families so that they know, okay, I can do these activities at home. And maybe some video as well. So that's something that's in the works. I hope I characterized that the right way.
Yeah, we started, some of it has already started, and it's really, really specific to like the testing that, the universal screening that we're doing with Fastbridge. And it outlines when the families get their reports at conferences, it outlines like the areas that the student might be struggling in, what the families can do specific to that area to support. Right now, it's all in words, right? Like it's all like, this is how what you can do to support. I would love to also have like a QR code on there or something with a link so that they can go to like a website where we've talked about like creating our own videos where we can show the families. But then it's not, I've looked at what some other districts have done and it's just kind of linking them to like reading rockets. Well, then you're going down this rabbit hole. We want parents to be able to have tools right at their fingertips that are really specific and individualized to their student. So yes, that is in the works.
Thank you.
And in terms of getting some more interest by parents in these topics, would it be appropriate for you to put a little plug in for CCIC?
Yeah, I think last year we did, one of our CCIC meetings was sharing the data. And honestly, I was kind of surprised at the interest. I thought people might be like, we don't want to see the data, tell us about something else. But there was quite a bit of interest, so that might be something we could think about for one of our topics.
And that's the meeting that's Thursday is CCIC.
Yep.
Yeah.
And this Thursday is the college conversations, but we could share the data set.
And where can people get information on that meeting Thursday if they want to attend?
We have a flyer that was sent to all families, and then they could also call Chris Lloyd if they wanted more information and wanted to register.
But they got it via email?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. We hope we can fit
So check your emails,
everyone in the
families.
boardroom. We'll
It's
see.
also on the events, I'm just looking at our app, it's on the events calendar too,
Oh,
and
okay,
it
good.
looks, there's an RSVP link there. So people can look at it that way as well.
But the reason I bring up CCIC is that, as Heather said, it's a hub for parents who want to dig into sort of the background. That was sort of my gateway to district things. So it is a good place if parents are looking to dig into this information some more. It's a committee to get involved with. Director Cook.
I wanted to follow up a little bit about the implementation of the multi-tiered systems of supports, and I know that there's been a lot of effort into trying to create some coherency around what those interventions at Tier 2 look like to develop specific skills. And I'm wondering how that is going with, I know there's been a lot of focus on getting Wit and Wisdom up and running in 3 through 5, but how those tiered supports are looking, and if there's sort of a need for some sort of a change or something between the really great reading framework in the K through 2 and then as you get to Wit and Wisdom, or if all of that is complementary enough that we're not like reinventing the way we're teaching core skills in grade 3. I don't know, just kind of general observations on
Well,
that.
you've got like two different things, like the really great reading is the phonics, right? And that's more of the foundational. The Wit and Wisdom is a background and knowledge building curriculum. So they do complement each other. Most of our interventions, especially at the early grades, are more on the phonics, like it's more foundational reading skills. We need to help kids break the code. So the really great reading is core. Wit and Wisdom is core, and then we've got the layered in tier 2 for kids who, what we're trying to do is have a lot of the tier 2 happening in the classroom, because we can't really intervene our way out, right? Like if you have too many kids that need the intervention, it's too hard. So we're trying to work on creating cohesive schedules so that teachers have, same grade level teachers have the same tier 2 time. So then instead of me in my classroom having 4 or 5 different skill groups, I can have 2, you can have 2, we can share kids. So that's one part, but the bigger part was helping teachers really be able to look at the data and determine, FastBridge data gives us really good information, but sometimes what the information tells us is you need more information. Like you actually need to do a diagnostic. And so we had to work with that, with the teachers to dig into like which diagnostic do we give? What does the diagnostic tell us? How do I align the instruction to that? Where do I find the resources for it? Because they're not fancy like interventions. They're all like just research-based, really simple. Like anybody could teach them to a kid, right? But teachers just need to know what they are. So this has really been working with the PLC teams, the professional learning communities, grade level teams on digging into the data, what does the data tell us, and then working with with Peter's department on building like a data hub, like what are the, I never get the word right for the interface, like what, like the dashboard. I always call it something different. Building the right dashboards for 2 purposes. One is the teachers, so that they can look at the information quickly, make good decisions from it. And 2, from a principal perspective, to really be able to monitor from a system level, like how are we doing as a system? That was something I struggled with as a principal. I would have to go into spreadsheets and count. I'm like, I know that that's a problem. I don't want a million spreadsheets out there, so we're working to create these dashboards that then follow the kid too. Probably way more than you wanted. But this is my jam. This is the part I love.
Great. Anything else, board members? All right. Thank you very much.
I think we need to stay here.
Yeah, you're staying. Because our next item is a prep for action item, the 2025-26 course registration guide, and we're scheduled to take action on this at the December 3rd meeting. I was going to give it to Superintendent Piquel, but he's handing off the clicker.
All right, this will be short and sweet.
Yes, sure. So we have a new dual credit option, concurrent enrollment. This will be at Mayo High School, offered this year. New because we have a newly certified teacher who has been working on his master's in computer science for about 3 to 5 years maybe. And so he is now certified and ready to be able to offer that at Mayo High School. So you'll see that in the guide only for Mayo High School, just because he's the only teacher that has that certification. But we're excited about being able to offer that. And then some additional courses being offered. Graphic and Digital Arts 3. So we've seen big numbers in our graphic design pathway, which is a newer area in our fine arts. And they brought a proposal, really wanted to be able to have students be able to go to that 3rd level. They are also flexible and willing to run graphic design 2 and 3 at the same time, because they understand that they may not get enough students to be able to have a separate section of graphic design 3. So we were excited to be able to offer that. Experienced leadership came from 2 teachers at John Marshall who work with student leaders a lot, John Soderberg Chase and Annie Thompson, and they wanted to propose a course where they could do some more deep diving into leadership styles, and then actually do some action research at the school on problems that they might want to solve. So to me, it sounded a lot like deeper learning. So we were excited to put that in the guide. We'll see how many students are interested. When we brought it to our registrars group, all 3 high schools wanted to offer that and see what we have in terms of interest. So that is the experienced leadership class. AP pre-calculus, we've had pre-calc, but the Mayo teachers have taken the AP training, and it's new. We haven't always had AP in the area of pre-calc, and they talk about it as being a really good gateway course for students who maybe haven't been involved in AP. So they wanted to rename it AP so that families and students know about it. We did kind of an extensive study on this because we wanted to be sure that by naming it AP, we weren't precluding kids who might have said, oh, I want to do pre-calc, but I don't want to sign up for the AP. So actually, we're going to have both of those in the guide because we want to be sure that we're getting all the students who are interested, and then we're going to really make sure that some of those AP concepts are in both of the courses. Trying some things out.
What I want to add about that is these teachers were really, so this was an honors class. It was an honors pre-calc that they wanted to turn into an AP pre-calc. And even though it had been honors, most of their kids were taking the AP test and having really good success. And so it was fantastic, like to go in and they had all their data prepared and shared with us. And then we did talk about, well, what if we switched all of them instead of having a regular and an AP, what if we just switched all of them to AP? And then that was where student voice was really important because we did not want to lose kids that would say, we're not going to take it. And like, that's fine for now. And we really want to increase the number of kids that would opt into AP. So we need to kind of start backwards. Like, how do we start really encouraging kids and prepping them for it so that we will have more opt-in?
And then the last one is an internship experience. So we have the mentorship class in the guide, and that has run for a number of years. But this would be an opportunity for students who want to do an internship, but they need a little bit more guidance, and they might not know where they want to focus. So we have a teacher, Mr. Raby, who teaches workplace readiness, and so he's really interested in trying to do kind of a seminar class where there would be some study, some guidance, maybe a little bit of guidance on his part, and then students would figure out where their mentorship or their internship might be. So we're excited to see if students are interested in that. And then we have one course being removed, and that is Animal Science 1. And that's because our teacher, Molly Cappers, is actually at CTEC now. So she used to be at John Marshall, and we were able to offer it there, but she is now at CTEC. And so we are not able to offer that course any longer.
That's it. Any questions, board members?
I am curious, so what is she teaching at CTEC, if you don't mind me asking?
She does teach agriculture, but she taught that principles of ag science at JM, and it was a concurrent class. And because she's no longer there, we can't offer it. So she does teach, she teaches ag science, and she's also point 2 or 3 instructional coach.
Thank you.
I think it's interesting that one of the courses we're adding is in the fine arts, only because I remember as I was looking at the PSEO invoice a few meetings ago and saw there are a lot of arts courses that we simply don't have at the high school that represent a lot of the enrollment at PSEO. So it's good to see another art course happening in our building.
And I loved that they're willing to do 2 and 3 together so that the enrollment doesn't hinder that from us continuing to grow it.
Great. So this is a prep for action item. So we will take action on this at the next meeting, unless there's any other questions. All right, let's move on. Thank you.
Didn't even need the big binder.
Looking at it on.
Our next item is another prep for action item 8.2. It is a policy committee recommendation on a new policy 606.5 library materials. School districts are required to implement the provisions related to the new Minnesota law on selection and reconsideration of library materials. This policy was reviewed and supplemented, the language was supplemented by legal counsel. And it had a first briefing at the September 24th regular meeting, and it will be an action item at the December 3rd meeting. But at the September 24th meeting, a board member requested the policy committee consider a few modifications, and those have been included in the draft policy. So any questions or comments? If not, we will take action on this at the next meeting. The next item is an action item, but before I read the resolution, we're going to have a presentation.
I'm looking for our auditor. Okay. Okay, great.
She's tired of it.
Enter stage left.
Hey. Okay.
Yay. All right. It's okay.
I've been watching for an hour.
Sorry.
That's absolutely fine.
I
Thank
was
you.
just catching up on some things. Good.
No problem. Just wanted to be sure. We kind of can't have our finance person do the external audit, so it's great to have.
Right,
them.
yes, that's very important.
That might not meet the definition of independent.
It would not at all, so.
Be like independent.
Well, sounds good. We have.
So thank you very much. I'm happy to be back again to introduce Nancy Schultzen and Berg. She's got an extra
Yes.
in her name that gets me every time. From Bergen KDV, who will go through the fiscal year 2024 audit, which we're happy to report looks really good again.
All right, the slides.
I should be good.
Oh, there we go. All right, thank you. It's nice that they're right in front of me. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for giving me some time tonight to go over the results of the audit for the year ended June 30th, 2024. I want to start out tonight by talking about some of the communications that we issue. And I see a lot of familiar faces, so I think you've probably heard most of this before. But the most important communication that we have, you'll find in the front of the financial statement document. It's 3 pages long, so if you want to read it in its entirety, that's where you'll find it. But in summary, we are issuing an unmodified opinion on the financial statements for the year. Basically, that is an indication that the numbers are fairly presented in all material respects based on the results of our audit. And then in the back of that financial statement document, you'll find several other letters. The first one is our report in accordance with government auditing standards. And these standards are required for all school districts in the state of Minnesota, and they require us as auditors to look closer at internal control, first of all, and then also laws, regulations, contracts, grants, those types of things. And based on our work there, we do not have any internal control findings that are in a written nature, and we also did not note any non-compliance. So completely clean report when it comes to the government auditing standards. And then because of the significance of federal funding that you receive as a district, we perform what's called a single audit. So this is in accordance with uniform guidance, which are the federal requirements. We tested 2 of your programs this year, child nutrition, and then also some of those COVID relief funds. Those will be wrapping up. This fiscal year you're in now is the last year you can spend those. So based on the work that we did on those 2 programs, we're issuing an unmodified opinion on compliance. And we also did not have any internal control findings as it relates to that compliance. And then our last official letter is our report on Minnesota legal compliance. So this comes to us from the Office of the State Auditor, and they're very specific about which statutes as they relate to accounting matters that we test as part of the audit. And again there, common theme, no findings were noted, no non-compliance came to our attention. And we have a different document, a separate document titled the Communications Letter. And there's several sections to that. The first one is required communication. So those are things that our standards say we need to put in writing to you as the governing board. And it would be our tool if we had anything significant or any difficulties, disagreements with management, those types of things. Happy to report that nothing strays from our standard language in that area. Then our financial analysis, which I will cover tonight, is the next section. And in the back, there's a legislative summary. Not a lot new in that area because we're in the second year of the biennium. And then in the very back, GASB is busy. So there are some new standards, 3 new standards that we'll be implementing with the district over the next several years. Moving then to some of the financial highlights, starting with taking a look at your resident students, and you can see the relative stability overall when you're looking at the 5-year picture here in this graph. And if you look at the change between 23 and 24, it's down about 189. These are your residents, so these are the students that live within your district that are attending public schools or charter schools. The next chart takes a look at the residents weighted by grade level, with the 1.2 being applied to the secondary students, and then also factors in the effects of open enrollment. I think something to take away from this chart is if you look at the open enrollment effects, very similar from 23 to 24. Not a lot of change there. So the decrease overall, the 200 students that you're down, relates to your residents this year. So nice to see that being stable. And one last look at your students, comparing as a percentage change, the residents on the left, and then the adjusted or the weighted pupil unit numbers on the right. Again, you can see the relative stability, 2.9 being the largest change that you experienced in the last 5 years, and that was in tumultuous times in 2021. All right, moving then to some actual dollar charts and graphs, taking a look again at 5-year perspective. The sources of revenue is what you see here. Overall, an increasing trend, which I'm sure does not surprise any of you. Up about 9.5%, or almost 25 million for 2024. Several things going into that increase. First of all, if you look at the top, that is the other revenue. That's going to include federal sources and also local sources. So a big change there related to investment income, being better market conditions in 24 than what we saw in 23. Below that, in the middle, the blue portion of the bar represents your state sources, and that is the largest share of funding that you receive, makes up 73.5% of the total, increased 19.2 million for the year. 3 big key sections of that. First of all, you had the increase in the formula allowance at 4% this year, which was unusual. You had the increase in compensatory monies that were received by districts, a one-time thing, and then also the cross-subsidy aid that came through in 2024, a big impact on districts for the year. And then on the bottom, you'll see your local property taxes, pretty consistent over the 5 years, up about 3.5 million for 2024 with the levy. When we look at the expenditures, again, over 5 years, you can see that increasing trend here, up about 15.5 million for 2024, which equates to about 6%. And not any category that jumps out as unusual or what we wouldn't expect. Another look at your expenditures, taking a look at where you're spending your money in a pie chart format. And I think a takeaway from this chart is the consistency that you see in those 2 pie graphs. They're very similar year over year. Consistent spending allows for consistent budgeting for your district. Next chart is a little bit of a comparison. So what we've done here is shown you your expenditures per ADM served, and then compared those numbers to overall statewide averages. The top line in each one of the charts is going to be your general fund. So you can see the increase there with the increase in the expenditures and the decrease in your students. So a little bit higher increase than what you might expect. And when you look at your district compared to overall statewide averages, you can see you are consistently below where the rest of the state is on average. All right, then we have the budget to actual. So on the far left, you see the original budget, anticipating pretty much a break-even year. That budget was modified just a bit, anticipating some excess expenditures, and you did outperform that budget in 2024 and increase fund balance by 10.7 million. When you look to the far right, some of those variances, if you look at the revenues, those are under budget, just over 5 million, and that's a 1.8% variance. So really pretty close to what you had anticipated when you're looking at a $292 million budget. State sources is under, related to overestimating the enrollment that you would have during the year. Those numbers fluctuate, come and go throughout the year, a little bit tough to predict. And then the federal sources also under budget, just anticipating more federal funds than what was received and spent in the year. On the expenditure side of things, under budget about 6%. Big portion of that has to do with open positions. So a lot of that happening during the year. So that's what you're seeing in the regular instruction and not vocational, special education instruction, biggest drivers there. District support services under related to anticipating more of that summer unemployment than what actually came through. And then your sites and buildings under related to utility costs and just being conservative with that budget. It's tough to predict what the winter will do and how much heat and all of those things that you're going to need. Next slide takes a look at the operations of the general fund, really high-level snapshot to just give you a big picture. So we talked about the increases in the revenues and the expenditures for the year, and then that overall increase in your fund balance. The bottom portion of this outlines all the categories that you are required to segregate fund balance. So this comes from state statute. All of those restrictions are outlined there. Some changes, some ups and downs, nothing too significant. There were a few new funding streams from the state. Not all of those were spent, so those are earmarked for the future. The literacy incentive aid, that student support personnel aid, some of those things. And then the bottom line, if you look 2 numbers up from the very bottom of the chart, your unassigned number. So that's what you have for future spending, represents about 17.4% of your expenditures based on 2024 levels. Increase there. A little bit different than that unassigned number. What we're showing you here is unrestricted as a percentage of unrestricted expenditures. So the state calculates this number for us and includes it on your compliance table. So you can see between the years 2020 all the way back to 2020 through now, you have seen a nice overall upward trend, small amounts each year, and pretty consistent with that state average, which hovers right around 20 to 25% for as long as I've been looking at these charts. We have a chart and a graph that take a look at your long-term liabilities. So the top portion of this are the debt instruments that the district has issued. So you have bonds, you have certificates of participation, some notes, leases, and then subscription-based liabilities. So those are things that you have control over and you're making payments on. So that number did decrease just based on those annual debt payments. The bottom portion, the 2 numbers, OPEB liability and pension liability, those are actuarially determined. So you can see a decrease in the OPEB and a decrease in the pension, but we know those go up and down just based on where that statewide pension, both of those pension plans sit at the end of each year. And I think that's highlighted here when you look at your total liabilities up and down, your long-term debt on the bottom, increasing as you issue debt and then decreasing as you're making payments on that debt. 2 more slides taking a look at your special revenue funds. So first of all, your food service fund. Significant increase in your revenues this year, up 34.5% with the state program, allowing all students to eat free. Expenditures also up, but not as much. Those were up about 14.6%, so an increase in your fund balance ending the year at just under $8.7 million. So very healthy fund balance in that fund. Oh, that's not the community service fund. That's the general fund again. So ignore the chart. Overall, community service fund had increases in revenues and expenditures with increased participation in the programs. And this fund is segregated into several different categories, ECF, e-school readiness, overall community service, and overall community ed. All of those categories were positive at year end. So a healthy year for the community service fund. And that is what I have. Any questions, anything you'd like more information on?
Board members? Well, I think it was noted in the background information that, and I'm going to quote it, for the 5th year in a row, there are no findings for the auditors to report to the school board. So I think congratulations are in order to Mr. Carlson, Mr. Krogstad, and the whole finance department for being able to achieve these results. We have had a lot of conversations with our community about our financials over the course of the referendum, and we had a lot of people asking us, where's the audit? And here is the audit, and it is clean for the 5th year in a row, and I appreciate all the work that happens to get us week after week after week to do this.
I had neglected when we started to very much thank our team. I take very little credit for the results in this audit other than I'm the person that's sitting up here, but we have a fantastic team led by Andrew Hoffbeck, who has been around for several years, precedes me by many, many years in this district, and he's incredibly talented, as is all of the accountants that are part of the audit and actually part of everyday operation. And so without them, this would not be possible. I take no credit. They get it all. They deserve it all. So I meant to say that earlier, but with the hesitation of trying to get Nancy in here, and anyway, I want to just take that opportunity to publicly thank them for all of their hard work.
Thank you. And I also appreciate the consistency of having past few years, giving us this presentation and this information so that we can see how we're progressing. So thank you.
Yeah, we really the goal, obviously the first goal is to issue that opinion on the financial statement. The second goal is to make sure that we're all understanding those numbers. So we try to use the charts and graphs in both forms because everyone sees things a little bit differently.
Great. And thanks for making the trip.
I just
you're
want
welcome.
to actually, if I understood your presentation right, the last chart is wrong on.
In the presentation, yes.
Can we substitute the right one and get that uploaded so that if people are
sure.
looking at
Yeah,
this
good point.
somewhere
Yeah,
that,
absolutely.
I want people to be able to make sure that they're seeing everything that we need to see.
I was attempting to get this corrected because we recognized it just before Nancy came in, and it is corrected. We just didn't get a chance to get it onto what we're seeing here now, so we'll get that uploaded to Assembly.
Yeah.
Just knowing that people will look, I want to make sure
Absolutely.
that they have what they need.
Yeah, they'll see a repeat of the previous, several slides previous to that one, so.
Got
So I apologize for that error.
Since we're issuing apologies and mea culpas, I feel I should come clean with an egregious misinformation that I perpetrated on the community repeatedly for months. I said in every Kiwanis Club and Rotary Club, PTA, that we had 3 clean audits in a row. I was wrong. It was 4, and now it's 5. And so I apologize to the team for my misinformation of that.
Well, there's a contract
wasn't incorrect.
conversation coming up, so.
It's true, technically it's correct, right? Thank you for the lawyer. Keeps it up.
Well, this is an action item, so I will read the resolution. Be it resolved that the School Board of Independent School District 535 does hereby accept the 2024 fiscal year audit report of the school district financial records as of June 30th, 2024, as submitted by Bergen KDV.
Move approval.
Second.
There has been a motion and a second. Any discussion or questions? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? The resolution has been approved. Thank you.
Thank
you
you.
so much.
We're clapping for money. I like it. Great. Our next agenda item is 8.2, approval of superintendent contract 2025 through 2028. Some background: in a closed session on July 23rd, school board members conducted the superintendent evaluation leadership component for 2023-24. On August 6th, the board reported on the results of the evaluation and ended the report with, the board thanked Dr. Piquel for his leadership and asked him to engage in contract negotiations for a subsequent 3-year contract to begin on July 1st, 2025. Myself and Director Cook were selected by the board to engage in contract negotiations with Superintendent Piquel. With the assistance of our board attorney, a draft contract was created. We met with Dr. Piquel to negotiate the contract, and Dr. Piquel agreed to the terms, and the contract is being brought to the board tonight as an action item. So I will read the resolution and ask for a motion and second. Be it resolved that the School Board of Independent School District 535 approve the subsequent contract of employment for Dr. Kent Piquel to serve as the Superintendent of Schools for the Rochester Public Schools effective July 1st, 2025 to June 30th, 2028.
Move approval. Second.
Has been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussions? All those, yes,
Sorry,
please.
I was gonna say, because I'm in my last handful of board meetings, he will be your responsibility, so.
Any other questions or discussion? Director Barlow.
And I'm thankful for the hard work that you, Chair Nathan, and Director Cook put forth with our district attorney to work out the details regarding this contract and to ensure that Dr. Piquel would continue in the service of Rochester Public Schools, especially at this critical time. And so just thank you for the hard work and look forward to voting on this motion.
Anybody else? All those in favor of the resolution say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The resolution has been approved.
Thank you very much.
And now you're stuck with us.
I'm incredibly honored, you all know that.
Thank you. All right, other business. 10.1, there were no questions submitted by board members before the meeting. The current version of the ABCD is available in this agenda item. Are there any agenda items board members would like to raise for consideration for a future meeting agenda? Upcoming board meeting dates, we have another special session public meeting on the Achievement and Integration Plan Report on December 3rd at 5:30 p.m. And then immediately after will be a regular meeting. We have a study session on December 10th at 5:30 p.m. On December 17th, please note the time change at 6 o'clock p.m. It is our annual special session on truth and taxation. And immediately after is a regular meeting. And then our first meeting of 2025 will be January 7th at 5:30 p.m. And hearing no other business, this meeting is adjourned at 8:07 p.m.